Once it was Afghanistan, then it was Iraq, and now the arrow is pointing at Iran. The war machine is rolling, the bombs are falling, and the media is in overdrive. For the past week, Israel has been waging a bombing campaign all over Iran, and now Donald Trump appears to be close to giving the green light for America to join in. I've been inundated in these days with messages of people asking, why is all this happening? Is the Americans going to join in? And what can we do about it? These questions and many more will attempt to answer in this week's episode of Against the Stream. My name is Hamid Alizadeh, and I'm here with Fred Weston. Fred, doesn't it all sound quite familiar?
Well, yes, it does, because when wars take place, they're not by chance. They're not an inexplicable phenomenon. There's always an interest behind each war. And because capitalism is a system based on classes with a privileged class at the top that owns and controls the mass media, what you can expect from them in times of war is not an objective explanation of what is happening, but what they want people to think, i.e., they, the Western imperialists, are the spreaders of human rights and democracy, and you have these terrible dictators around the world that have to be crushed. More or less, that's the shorthand version of what's going on.
Yeah, I mean, let's just lay out the facts briefly. Israel started its attacks last Friday morning, Thursday night. Until now, well above 1,000 targets have been hit. These were originally mainly military targets, nuclear facilities for Iran's nuclear program. But now they've spread to oil and gas installations, ministries, areas in very densely populated areas of Tehran, which is a very densely populated city. A whole host of top government and military officials have been killed, including the leader of the Revolutionary Guards and the leader of the Iranian army. Dozens of nuclear scientists have reportedly been assassinated. And up till now, 500, according to human rights activists, which is an American group, 585 people have been killed in Iran. 239 of these were civilians. And we've seen Iran firing retaliatory missile strikes on Israel. Hundreds of missiles have been sent off. Some of them have clearly gotten through the supposedly impenetrable Israeli defenses. And up to 24 people have reportedly died, and obviously many more wounded so far. Donald Trump has, the American administration in the beginning, denied any involvement in this. Trump very quickly, after seeing the first spectacular results of this attack, has come out basically trying to claim responsibility, or at least take ownership over this, saying he did know, he was more than informed, and has taken a very belligerent stance of demanding complete surrender on the part of Iran. And now the report this morning was that Trump has approved plans for a strike, but not given the go-ahead. So I guess the plan is ready to go whenever he wants to push the button. He says himself, I may do it, I may not. Nobody knows. That's probably close to the truth.
Probably doesn't know himself.
The Americans have said the Iranians have said if the Americans go ahead with this, all of their bases in the Middle East, and there are tens of thousands of soldiers stationed all over Iraq and the Gulf states, in Bahrain, in Qatar, and many other places, will be legitimate targets for the Iranians. So will American naval assets in the region. They've also said that they might close the Strait of Hormuz, which is a a strait through which 20% of the world's oil production passes, oil and gas passes through. They've also said to the Gulf states that if America uses your territory to strike against us, you are legitimate targets. That's a warning that Iran has sent to the Gulf states many times, which is obviously something that would devastate the world economy, besides from devastating the region. But all of this would send shockwaves throughout the world and risk a general conflagration of the whole region, a barbaric, all-out war, which would be unpredictable. The situation is already unpredictable, but it would be very, very reactionary. But before we go into the reasons, let's just stop at the hypocrisy. I thought that's this morning as I was coming in, I saw the headlines, and it was Iran bombs hospital in southern Israel, and the Israeli defense minister saying that's it. Khamenei must go. This is crossing a line. And yes, I mean, civilian casualties are never we don't support that in any way, shape, or form. Absolutely. But it does ring quite hollow, because this was a hospital near a military installation that was hit by an Iranian missile. Whereas Israel, for months and months, for more than a year, for almost 2 years now, has been systematically bombing and attacking hospitals, health clinics, aid workers, schools in Gaza. By the way, that's still going on right now.
Of course.
The destruction of Gaza is still going on. If this, we talk about how they spoke about Russia when in the war against Ukraine. Every time any civilian is hit, is brought out like,
yeah.
And when Russia do it, but the way that they've been attacking these densely populated areas in Tehran, and when Iran defends itself, what is the response? The first response, by the way, by Western leaders, by European leaders, after Israel attacked Iran, was to call for Iran to restrain itself.
That's right. It's always Iran that has to.
We're gonna beat you up and we're gonna batter you, but you have to restrain yourself, otherwise. And we wonder what is the otherwise. The G7 has come out. These are the most powerful Western. This is basically Western imperialism. The bloc of Western imperialism come out with a statement saying, Iran is the principal source of regional instability and terror. I mean, the fact that they would say this with a straight face is just mind-boggling.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts?
Well, if you look at the whole region and what's happening. One, I mean, we don't want to develop this point. We've developed it in other podcasts and articles, but the weakening of US imperialism as the big policeman on the block has actually allowed secondary powers, minor powers like Israel or Turkey and others, India, etc., to feel that they can flex their muscles more and they can push their own agendas more, their own interests. We should make it clear here, there is no such thing as a national ruling class of a capitalist country that is in the right. They're all defending their class interests, their national class interests, their imperialist interests. And this question, for instance, of how you report the bombing of a hospital in Israel or in Gaza or in the Ukraine, the emphasis you give it in the news is different. The reason is the ruling classes don't really care about the victims of war. I mean, if Netanyahu was concerned about the people of Israel, he wouldn't have provoked this war, which is opening up Israel to being bombed. And for the first time, things are being seriously hit. The people have been killed, hundreds have been injured. Netanyahu actually, if you think of the cynicism of the ruling elite, is this. He probably sees that the number of dead as being a useful tool in manipulating public opinion in Israel. It reminds me of Mussolini when he went to war. He actually said, give me I don't remember the figure. He gave a figure of number of dead, which he considered would be a useful bargaining chip because he thought at the end of the war, thinking he was going to win, obviously, the number of dead in his own country would be a useful thing to put on the table and say, so this is what I did, i.e. sacrificing his own people. The same thing is happening here. They will go to war with their own strategic interests. Now, in the Ukraine, obviously, the West want the Ukraine to win this war, which is unwinnable. It's already lost. And therefore, anything that Putin does is highlighted. Nobody's defending Putin here either. They're all, he represents an oligarchic capitalist regime as well. But they're all in it for their own interests. In the Ukraine, therefore, you highlight the death of civilians, right? In Gaza, when hospitals are being directly hit, they're being targeted. They're not being hit accidentally because next door there's a military base or infrastructure, whatever. They're consciously destroying Gaza. They have killed. I was looking at the figures the other day, just the update of the figures. If you add up the number of people killed and the number of people missing and presumed dead because they've not been found, add the 1,000 that have been killed in the West Bank as well, you have 77,000 deaths. And that is not as highlighted as when it hits the targets they want to highlight. So when we read the news, we should always look at it in terms of what interest lies behind the way this is being presented. Yeah. And actually look at what interests lie behind the war.
In reality, we can say that Netanyahu is holding the Israeli population hostage. That is the way that, because he's provoking this war, and now he says, "I am the only one who can defend you. You have to stay with me." It's deeply unpopular, obviously, and this is a way for him to stay in power.
Yeah,
and keeping the population hostage.
You have a combination here, actually, of the interests of an individual, which sometimes can play a big role. The interests of Netanyahu. It was just a few days before the bombing started that his government was facing possible collapse.
Yes.
He knows that if his government collapses, he could well be facing a number of court cases.
Yeah.
He'd be in trouble personally. So far, ever since October the 7th, he has kept up the momentum of war. It's Gaza, then Lebanon. He's even bombed Syria, the Houthis. Now he's upping the ante massively with Iran. So long as Israel is at war, he can play the war leader and the defender of Israel and conveniently defend his own interests. There is another side, of course. There is also an interest of the ruling class of Israel.
I just want to, before we get to that, I think this is an important point. The question of the democratic mandate of this war, right? Because yes, war hysteria has a very powerful effect, temporary, but a very powerful temporary effect on the psyche of a population. So at the moment, there's quite widespread support for this war.
Yes.
But the fact is that Netanyahu is incredibly unpopular. And as you say, the way that he remains in power and have done so since the war on Gaza started has been by just constantly escalating the crisis, constantly starting new wars, new fronts, keeping the crisis going. Whereas in reality, he's hated by the vast majority of Israelis who believe that the 7th of October his government was responsible for that. They believe that he was responsible for the deaths of a lot of the hostages and the remaining ones if they die. But also, this is not just Israel's war. Israel is a part of Western imperialism, is a ally of America, is within the umbrella of American imperialism.
Yes.
Where Europe also belongs. This is a war of Western imperialism for domination over this region. And our leaders here in Europe are equally complicit. Maybe they're not pulling the trigger, but the Americans have admitted that they are providing intelligence. They're defending Israel against missiles from Iran. The weapon systems Israeli weapon systems are Western weapon systems, which America could turn off at any point if they wanted to.
70% of Israel's weapons come from the United States.
Exactly. They could turn, an F-35 cannot work without the software and the, the communication systems and so on that America controls. That's just a fact. Britain as well supplies arms to Israel. So the whole of the West is implicated here. But no one has voted for this. No one in the West supports this. In Britain, I just read this morning in the Telegraph, Lord Herma is the Attorney General. I haven't really quite figured out what the Attorney General does, but apparently he kind of gives legal advice on laws. And he was out unprovoked saying he doubted the legality of a British strike against Iran. Why would he say that if that's not something that's being discussed? It's clear that the government is discussing this, and he is cautioning against it. In the US, Donald Trump was elected. One of the key elements of his election campaign was no more forever wars. There's so many people who've brought out all of the old quotes by Trump. 60% of Americans are opposed to this war. 53% of Republicans. And 19% only are in favor. This is 19% of Republicans, 16% of the population as a whole. There's mass opposition to this war. But these guys are fighting this war, which could have devastating consequences for the whole world, for billions of people.
Well, one of the things people voted Trump for is that he said he was promising to bring an end to the Ukraine war, to pacify the situation in Gaza, Israel, and pull America out of these wars and not enter new wars, not send American soldiers around the world risking being hit. Yeah. And it made him very popular, actually, as opposed to Biden, who was seen as a warmonger. Yeah. So one element of his election campaign was this. He has now failed miserably to do anything about the Ukraine war. And in Gaza, rather than solving the problem in Gaza, what we're seeing is this war now becoming a regional conflagration with Israel attacking Iran. So he's not sticking to what he promised. He promised stuff which he can't actually deliver. That's the problem. But also, if this does become a generalized war in the region, i.e. American planes and missiles being used, one, to defend Israel, because it will need it, and two, to actually attack Iran. And Iran retaliates by hitting American bases and interest in the region. And Iran has said they can block as you said earlier on, they can block the Strait of Hormuz. You also have the Houthis in Yemen, which temporarily, they made a deal with the Houthis. If this takes off again, they can come back into the picture. Can you imagine the Strait of Hormuz being a war zone and Red Sea being a war zone? It's not just the 20%. There's a lot more. It's not even just the oil. The Suez Canal, a huge amount of trade goes through it. This would massively disrupt the world economy. You could see the price of oil shooting up. Another thing that Trump promised, he would bring down the prices. Yeah. If oil goes up, it affects not just the gas, the petrol you put in the tank of your car. It affects transport costs. It affects food costs. It affects everything. So you could see an impact on inflation. Yeah. And you could see a general crisis in terms of jobs and industries. This would be the consequences of this whole scenario. And it would have an impact inside America, far beyond. I think one of the reasons Trump said, nobody knows what I'm going to do. The reason he said that, I think, is because he doesn't know what he's going to do. Because he's put himself in a position now where if he were to back out now from attacking Iran, he would be seen as the guy that threatens but doesn't act, and lose, obviously, credibility. If he does attack, the other side of it is you were in the middle of making some kind of deal, and in the middle of the deal where there is negotiation taking place, You suddenly decide to turn around and I'm just going to bomb you to hell. Where's the credibility of the United States as a serious power globally? Whichever way he goes, he is going to expose himself. And he's facing one hell of a dilemma. I think that the events in the Middle East are going to impact politics in America big time.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, first of all, this was, everyone talks about Iran having to restrain themselves. This was a completely unprovoked. In fact, if you look at the history of the past many years, Iran has been a rising power,
Yes.
a rising regional power. It has a strong industry, has lots of resources, it's developed militarily and politically, has gotten quite a lot of influence in the region. And it's been advancing on a whole series of areas. And that has come into conflict with Israeli imperialism, American imperialism. Is come into conflict with Saudi imperialism. And what the Iranians have said is, well, we are here. We're not going anywhere. Let's make a deal. Let's we want to sit at the table,
That's
basically.
right.
And the Israelis have refused to accept that again and again and again.
Well, look, if you go back a little bit in history, the recent history, the United States invaded massively Iraq, overthrew the regime. They wanted their own regime. That's right next door to Iran. The other side of Iran, Afghanistan. They invaded Afghanistan with the aim of establishing a US-friendly regime. Now, the irony, of course, is that America failed in both cases, losing lots of soldiers for what? From their point of view. They failed in both countries, and in the case of Iraq, the signal was quite clear to Iran. We're not here to defend the ruling class of Iran or America or Israel. We're objectively analyzing the interests of each one of these. If you think of the Iranian ruling elite, the regime which is there, they're facing a U.S. imperialism tightly connected with Israel, which has in the past threatened it right on its border, basically. It went badly for the US, that's the point. It actually, instead of achieving what the US wanted, the US came out of that war greatly weakened, and Iran's influence greatly strengthened. Something similar happened in Syria for a period at least. They bombed the regime, there was civil war, but they didn't overthrow it immediately. And then in Lebanon, things swung in the favor of Iran. Iran emerged as a power with a lot of influence in the region. That was seen as a threat to Israel, and the US saw it as a threat. There's always been a faction of the US ruling class that they've always wanted to attack Iran. They've always been there. It was a question of which faction dominated at a given moment. There's always that. There has been that element there. I'm sure that section are gung ho at the moment because they're getting
the neocons.
Yeah, their agenda is now being carried out. But you can see how they've created a situation where Iran, the Iranian regime, is attempting to defend its sphere of influence in the region, its power, and this has not happened by accident. It is a consequence of the politics of imperialism in the region. They can't blame the Iranians for this. They should actually, the main destabilizing element in the Middle East is actually the US. Yeah. They're not Iran, the US and their local proxy, you could say, the Israeli ruling class. They're the ones who are destabilizing the region for their interest, because you have contradictory interests between Israel and Iran. That's a fact on a regional level.
Yes, I mean, the talk right now is Iran's nuclear program. The Iranians say this is a peaceful nuclear program. We don't want to build a bomb. But obviously, this is not. This is a bit more than a civilian nuclear program. But just bearing in mind what you explained, that every country around them that's not a US proxy has been invaded. right? Turkey is a member of NATO and was very close to America until recently, where there's been a slight fallout. The Saudis and the Gulf states are U.S. Or were U.S. proxies. They've also been shifting slightly, but nevertheless. Then they invade Iraq, and they invade Afghanistan. And Pakistan at that point was also leaning towards America. They're surrounded on all sides. Mm-hmm. It's clear what was next. That's never been in doubt. And as you say, a section of the American ruling class, the so-called neocons, but they, by the way, both in the Democratic and the Republican Party. It's the old guard, the Cold War mafia of the American ruling class. They've been wanting to go for Iran.
Yes.
They've also wanted to go for North Korea. North Korea has nuclear bombs. It's a very poor nation. It's backward in many ways. But when it came to it, we remember Trump last time talking about little rocket man and hailing, hellfire on him and so on. But that's what protected them. Mm-hmm. Iraq, they talked about weapons of mass destruction in Iraq. There weren't any. They were invaded. They talk about nuclear weapons in North Korea. There are some, and they're not invaded. So obviously that's quite a clear sign. But I would also say from... I think every serious military expert agrees that Iran never actually wanted to build the actual bomb. The policy is to become what's called a nuclear threshold state. You have all of the elements to build a bomb, and you use that as a preventative measure to make deals. And the deal that was being negotiated between Trump and the Iranians were precisely this. That Trump, so the Iranians were asking, basically, at the moment, Iran is under some of the most severe sanctions in world history, except for the ones on Russia. But they're much more severe on Iran because it's a smaller country and also industrially more backward. But in return for allowing Iran to come into the world market, Trump was demanding that Iran completely dismantle its nuclear program. But from an Iranian point of view is, well, this is what's kept us safe so far. This is what's meant that you've taken us seriously so far because you knew that if you went for us, we might build a bomb. And so why would we give up that bargaining chip?
That's right.
We'll just lower it. And obviously with their actions, they are proving the Iranians right. That you cannot trust American imperialism.
That's right.
They will,
the irony of all this is that it will actually push the Iranian regime, or at least elements within it, to want to accelerate their nuclear program.
Yes.
Because the logical conclusion will be, look, they're prepared to bomb us. Yeah. They're bombing massively. This had never happened before.
They're talking about killing Khamenei,
yes,
killing top officials. That's
right, going for the whole regime. This is actually accelerating the move towards a bomb. Yeah. You could look at it this way. They could have sat down at the table and Trump could have made a proposal, which is not surrender everything. That's not called negotiating. Right? That's just crushing the other side. They could have said, look, we can keep your program at civilian level for nuclear energy. You let us have regular inspectors. We keep a check on it. On condition that you abide by all this, we can lift the sanctions and Iran can be brought back in to, commercial relations, trading, etc. Which, by the way, the regime in Iran urgently needs because the social economic fabric of the country is bad. I mean, it's declining internally. That deal, objectively speaking, you could say, yes, that could have happened. The problem, of course, is this. Iran is 10 times the size of Israel. It has an industrial base. It has a working class. It has raw materials. It's rich in oil, for example. You leave Iran to develop for a period of time, it could emerge as a major capitalist industrial power in the region, which means that potentially I mean, if you think about it, going right far back, think of China, the way it was in. Now, I'm not saying Iran is going to become a China, but they let China develop for decades economically, and now they're facing a major problem that China is a major competitor globally. Now, Iran doesn't have the potential to be that. But who would it be the main threat to regionally if it became a regional power? It is a regional power already, but if it became a strong regional power in terms of industrial development, economy, etc., it's Israel. Israel is the country that would lose out if Iran emerged as a powerful economy. Therefore, Israel is really, they talk about Iran being the destabilizing element. Actually, the destabilizing element in the Middle East is Israel. Yeah. Israel has no interest in peaceful relations with Iran, which would allow Iran to develop its economy, which would give it the power. We always say with economic development comes military power as well. And we're seeing that in several countries. So the logic of the situation is that Israel cannot allow that to happen. It's not so much about the bomb itself. It's about Iran emerging as a power in the region.
Yeah.
And they want to do everything possible to stop that. And just as Trump was in the process of negotiating, they cut across that with the bombing to stop any kind of deal being made like that. Now, what are they going to achieve? Are they actually going to achieve their aims? That's the question.
Yeah.
Are they going to destroy the nuclear, centers that they have? To do that, they need, the reason is they need American intervention. They need it for their own defense, because it's quite clear that their own defense system is not sufficient to stop Iranian missiles. That's being shown to be the case now. The last time Iran fired a barrage of missiles, the Americans and the British, by the way, they intervened actively to actually hit some of these missiles and defend Israel. They need that again.
Yeah.
And they also need it if they really want to carry out their aim of destroying the nuclear research centers. They need these famous American bombs that only American planes can carry. Even then, that's a separate question. Whether they can actually achieve the destruction is another thing. But without it, it's clear they can devastate Iran, they can bomb it. They cannot destroy its ability to develop its nuclear technology.
Yeah, I think that is the key question, isn't it? But before that, I think just to dwell on what you mentioned right before that, why is it happening and why is it happening now? I think that's a question that a lot of people, I've gotten messages which just says, why is Israel attacking Iran? I had quite a few of those messages and phone calls. Why is this happening? And I think you hit the nail on the head, because there are two processes which are intertwined here. On the one hand, you have Netanyahu, who is fighting for his own survival. Scrupulous, egomaniac, megalomaniac, narcissist as he is. He refuses to lose power. And he has been intent on dragging America into a war with him against Iran for the past year and a half and more. And there's an article in the New York Times yesterday, actually, which explains very well how this happened. And in the last few months, the Americans realized that they could not stop him. And Netanyahu actually said, we have this plan, we're going to do it whether you're coming or not. Which in the end apparently meant that Trump said, okay, I think we should go with it. He was impressed by the plan. But he wants this. And as you say, it is the interest of the Israeli ruling class as well. Not just Iran becoming consolidating its position in the region will not just become a industrial threat, but the nuclear program itself is an existential threat to Israel. In the long run, because Israel, as you say, is a very small country. If Iran had nuclear bombs, it would take 3 bombs, one on each of the 3 major cities, Haifa, Tel Aviv, and Jerusalem. That would be the end of Israel. Obviously, it wouldn't come to that, but in world relations, the threat of that is enough that Israeli imperialism cannot act with impunity anymore. This is the main. I think this is the key thing.
With the imagine a nuclear armed Iran. It would give it far greater weight in the region in terms of trade, commerce, spheres of influence, all the rest of it, which would massively reduce Israel's scope.
Yeah.
So it's not so much the use of the nuclear weapons, because to be honest, Israel is also a nuclear power.
Yeah.
Once you start using nuclear weapons, nobody wins. You self-destroy, basically. That's also the case globally. But if you are a power which has those weapons, like America and like Russia, the weight of these countries is partly economic, obviously, but they're also two very big major nuclear powers. That carries weight when you're sitting at a negotiating table when it comes to trade deals and other such matters.
And exactly because what we have is a situation where Israel, look at how Israel has been acting. Bombing Gaza to bits, bombing Lebanon to bits, taking chunks of Lebanon, taking chunks of Syria, bombing the Houthis. They are the all-dominant air force in the region.
If we want to take a look at the Zionist project, right?
Yeah.
They are seriously looking at the idea that they want the whole of historical Palestine to become Israel. The far right, but not just the far right, a significant section of the Zionist ruling class are carrying out a project which is basically to expel the Palestinians. In Gaza, they've created, I think the thinking is create such devastation that to push the Palestinians to want to leave. Yeah. In the West Bank, they've killed 1,000 people in this last year and a half. They are encroaching on their land. They're taking more and more of it. They took the Golan Heights years ago. Now they've extended further, always with the excuse of security. They want to create a greater Israel. That is a fact. Yeah. And a greater Israel with a powerful industrial weight to it. Now, that's the plan. Achieving it is something different because you cannot destroy a whole people like what they've done trying to do to the Palestinians and think the rest of the Arab world is just going to sit there and take it. That the Arab people, that the people of Jordan are just going to let this happen forever. The acting on that project is actually destabilizing the region even further.
And then there's the other, I mean, even without that project in mind, Israel, the Israeli ruling class, we can see this arrogance, right? This is the same arrogance as US imperialism has had since the collapse of the Soviet Union. We are the only people in the world who is allowed to attack anyone.
We have the right.
We have the right to do anything we want. They talk about nuclear armed Iran. As you say, Israel is the only nuclear power in the region. Israel has destroyed all the air forces except for the Saudi one, which has good equipment, but is not. I mean, the Saudi army is a joke, really speaking. It's destroyed all the air forces. It's destroyed all of the Syrian air defenses. They can do whatever they want in this region, and that's how they want it. And a strong Iran is detrimental to that, and they will stop it at any. That is It's not an existential threat to Israel or the Israeli ruling class as a class. They can exist. It's an existential threat to Israeli imperialism, to all of their plans, whether it be the ultra expansionist, Greater Israel plan of taking over Lebanon, taking big chunks of Syria, moving into Jordan, or even the position that they have today, which is we do as we please and no one is allowed to oppose. That is the real threat to them that Iran poses. And in that, they have the support of the neocons in America, which actually Trump opposed. Trump is an isolationist, and there's a strong isolationist wing of the American ruling class, which has been fighting against the neocons who've been the ones in power basically the past 35 years or even more. Most of the post-war period, they've been most of the post-Soviet period, wading into one country after another. And their policy is what? No one is allowed to stand up. No one is allowed to object. No one is allowed to criticize. No one is allowed to do anything except if we allow them to. and therefore any squeak should be crushed. And that's, I mean, you read the Wall Street Journal, they've been going in overdrive, editorial after editorial. Now is the time, we have to go in. I'll just read out one of the things that they say. They say, if the US won't help one of its strongest and most loyal allies finish the job of eliminating Iran's nuclear threat in inconsistent airspace, the message to China will be that there's no chance the UL will defend Taiwan. Everyone will see it, from the Kremlin's commissars to the communist bosses in Beidahi. So this is what they say. You must crush any opposition.
But it goes back to the point we said at the beginning.
Yeah.
The relative long-term decline of the US is evident to a lot of powers, and it sends out the signal that if you're a power regionally in one part of the world, you have more room to maneuver. Yeah. You can move to impose your influence, to widen your sphere of influence. And the way the US behaves, i.e., if it's seen to be untrustworthy, i.e., we can't count on the US to defend us, because the US under Trump has clearly indicated that not isolationist completely, but they have their particular interests that they want to defend, and that they need to pull out of some regions, such as the Ukraine. Trump has made that clear. Well, that sends a message, as you said, to the Chinese. Oh, we could push for Taiwan maybe at some point. Trump has actually made the point that Taiwan, not particularly of interest. He said it's close to the China, basically. What do they give us? And all the comments he made. But that's the same in other regions. It creates the scenario of India, Pakistan, where India feels that it can stretch, flex its muscles in the region. Israel, in effect, is doing that. Turkey is doing that. What it's doing is, it's not that one is more progressive than the other, but this so-called multipolar world is creating much greater instability in all the regions of the world. We're seeing more and more wars. The Ukraine, when it started, to a lot of people in Europe, would have come as a shock. Then Gaza. You say, Gaza it's the worst we've ever seen, but it's the continuation of a long-standing conflict. This attack on Iran brings out clearly, it must be bringing in the minds of millions of people, there's one war after another that's developing. And it's a consequence of this realignment, rebalancing of the powers globally.
Yeah. But the policy that Trump is now carrying out is the one that he swore that he wouldn't.
Exactly.
Which is, yes, let's show, every crisis is a opportunity to make an example and show people how strong America is. But, what is it? The definition of insanity, they say, is trying to do the same thing over and over and expecting a different result.
Yeah.
And the thing that Trump forgets, clearly, is this is exactly how Afghanistan went down. This is exactly how the Iraq War went down. These were regimes which defied, or were seen to defy, America in one way or the other. They also had natural wealth that the Americans wanted. And so they went for them. And the result was what? Was not a victory, was actually to exacerbate the crisis of US imperialism to the state where it is now, which is a serious crisis and a serious decline even of its power on a global level. The Israelis are doing the same thing. They are puffed on their own arrogance and success. They saw, okay, we did what in Palestine. The fact is that they couldn't win. They didn't win in Gaza. The Palestinian people have not won anything. They've been destroyed. But Israel did not achieve any of its military aims, stated military aims, which was a humiliation. But they feel they haven't seen the consequences of that. Then they went for Lebanon and Hezbollah, and they, on paper, seem to have succeeded. As you say, they've been they tacitly participated in the collapse of the Syrian regime. They took chunks of Syria, and they think nothing has happened, right? Of course, things are moving. The whole region is progressively being more and more destabilized, but they are puffed on their own arrogance. and they see, okay, now is our chance. We've taken out all of the allies of the Iranians. Now is our chance to go for the head. But the point is, can they win?
Well, you see, people like Netanyahu and other leaders in Israel, you see, they have a powerful military, highly advanced technology, extremely sophisticated secret services, the Mossad and all of this. They feel they're almost omnipotent. They killed the leader of Hezbollah. They've killed key leaders in Iran. They have a powerful military backed up by the US. They think they can just march in and dictate to the countries around them. But you see, if you think dialectically and you think about processes below the surface and you think about the processes taking place in the minds of ordinary working class people, millions of them in the region, you imagine a scenario, let's say that the worst case scenario, it becomes a full-fledged war with Israel and the United States cooperating in the massive bombing of Iran, which, to put to one side whether they will actually achieve what they want, which is the total destruction of the research centers, that's not guaranteed at all. And I think one of the problems Trump is looking at is this. He's been tempted by the idea, we've got the bombs. Israel doesn't. If we leave it to Israel, this could drag on. That's what he thinks. And this is not good. But we've got the bombs. If we could a precise strike and actually destroy those nuclear centers, that would be the end of it. Achieved, objective achieved. There's no absolute guarantee. The experts point that out. There's no serious guarantee that would happen.
Yeah.
What it would mean, though, is they've been sucked into the war. And what we were saying before, you're sucked into the war. Iran retaliates in all the ways it can, massively hitting American bases, closing the Strait of Hormuz, and a major, serious economic downturn globally, the effects on the lives of millions of people, starting with the people in the Middle East itself. Israel also. Israel is spending huge amounts of money on this war. We were looking at the figures. It's one night of air defense against the missiles costs an average of $280 million a night, right?
The war in the first few days cost $700 million a day.
A huge amount of Israel's resources is now going on the military. This is going to have an effect. It has already had an effect on the fabric of Israeli society. But it's not just what happens inside Israel. There's a number of regimes. I'm thinking, for instance, of Jordan. Jordan is right next door. They normalized relations with Egypt and Jordan, so they're not a danger in the short term. In fact, if you remember, Jordan actually participated in defending Israel with the excuse that they were hitting missiles flying over Jordanian airspace. Last time there was that barrage. That created resentment inside Jordan. You're collaborating with the Zionist elite instead of defending the Palestinians. A regime like the Jordanian regime could collapse in these situations. We've seen wars can create sudden changes in countries. You could have a collapse of the Jordanian regime. You could have other regimes also facing collapse. What kind of regimes would come to power? That's another question. Would it be stability, or would it be a Syrian-type situation that could emerge, or Iraq, or Yemen and other countries that we've seen? They could destabilize one country after another, and instead of having a stable scenario in the Middle East with Israel at the heart of it dominating, they could create constant turmoil, constant conflict, which could actually, in the long run, even endanger Israeli society itself.
Yeah.
That is the fact. Yeah. But Netanyahu and these political leaders, you see it sometimes, they would rather provoke barbarism than risk losing their own privileged position at the top. They would rather sow devastation on a country like Iran, or like they did what they've done in Gaza, than face the threat of losing their own positions. This is what these people are doing. They're destabilizing the whole region, and the world is watching.
Yeah, I mean, this is what Barack Obama eloquently called unintended consequences.
Yes.
Which is the barbarism that U.S. imperialism and Israel unleashes in these wars. It's a characteristic of capitalism that it becomes increasingly short-sighted.
Mm-hmm.
The capitalists don't produce for the good of society. They don't do anything for the good of society. They do things for profits, for the interests, and as you say, here you have the very, very narrow interests of the Israeli ruling class and Benjamin Netanyahu himself as an individual. But even from a military point of view, this is the question: what is the actual state of play? First of all, we have a situation where Iran has been hit very hard. And I think if I were an Iranian worker looking at this, I would be thinking, what the hell have you guys been up to? And that's clear. That shows the rottenness of that regime.
Mm-hmm.
That they've been too busy enriching themselves than to actually care about this national security of the level of intelligence failure is just humiliating, right? Its air defenses have been hit and so on. But if we take that aside, what are the war aims of Israel? The stated war aim is to dismantle the nuclear program, and the unstated one is regime change.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, they are calling for regime change. Benjamin Netanyahu is appealing to the Iranian workers and so on. But both of those have failed so far. First of all, the nuclear program can be damaged, but it cannot be destroyed because the Iranian nuclear program has been going on for decades. They have a whole scientific community. Whatever Israel hits, if they can even hit them, as you say, it's very, very unsure if they can actually completely dismantle the structures, the physical structures. And they might not even know all of them. But if they can, there's still a scientific community. Killing some nuclear scientists is not the end of that. And they can rebuild. Regime change has definitely not succeeded. I have a quote here this is Iran International, is a Saudi-owned, very reactionary, pro-US website that's been using, in this situation, they've been, along with the Israelis, basically cheering on the Iranian opposition, Reza Pahlavi, who's the son of the old king, and so on. But they even had to publish some of the real situation that's developing, because in reality, people who are disgruntled inside of Iran are themselves are being pushed to rally around the regime.
Yes.
You know, the Financial Times said, how can you ask people for regime change when you're dropping bombs on their heads, right? And this is what he says. This is someone from inside, right? He says, wasn't this about nuclear facilities, many ask? Why are you targeting city ministries? Why strike targets nestled inside residential neighborhoods? We're friends of the Iranian people, Israeli officials say. Well, the dead and wounded beg to differ. So far, the casualties are overwhelmingly civilian. Homes have been flattened, lives erased. This is a long article, right?
But how can it's incredible to think that Netanyahu thinks, he goes on TV and he says to the Iranian people, we're not at war with you, the Iranian people. You're not our enemy, but it's the regime.
Yeah.
The same man that has devastated Gaza and the Iranian people, do you think that they haven't seen that? The Iranian people haven't seen what the Zionist regime has done to the Palestinian people and what they've done to other countries, like what they've done to the Houthis, what they've done in Syria, in Lebanon, etc. The idea that is the man that is going to provoke some kind of mass movement in Iran to overthrow the regime is absurd. I mean, my reading is a lot of people that took part in the protests over the veil and other protests, student protests, etc. They're against the regime, but they're not going to move against the regime at a moment when they're under attack from Israel. and or from America. It's having the opposite effect. It's actually rallying the people in spite of their own hatred or at most indifference towards this regime to rally around. When your neighborhood is being bombed, you're not going to side with the guy that's dropping the bombs.
Exactly.
It's just incredible to think that Netanyahu thinks like that.
Which leaves us with this fact that here you have a situation where Israel has staked all of its everything on this all or nothing attack on Iran. Trump has tied his reputation to it as well. Yeah. He's bought into this. And this is a war that the longer it lasts, the more the balance will tip in favor of Iran. Why? Because all Iran has to do to win is not to lose. Mm-hmm. All Iran has to do to win is to maintain itself. The Iranian regime has to maintain itself. The nuclear program has to just maintain itself. And at a certain point, tiredness will set in. We already see that Israel has said they only have missile defense capabilities for another 10 to 12 days at this rate. Iran controls a far bigger landmass, far bigger working class. It has an industrial base. Once the war settles into a war of attrition, who's going to be victorious is the ones who can produce the biggest amount of missiles, the biggest amount of arms. Alan Wisman was making this point this morning when we were talking. An Arrow interceptor, what's it called? This missile defense shield system that they have. Arrow, I forgot the name of it. These missiles cost $2 million to produce. They're only produced in the few hundreds per year, even though they're working day and night. The Iranian missiles, ballistic missiles, cost a few $100,000. And the Iranian regime can, if it wants to, mobilize a war economy, which can mobilize tens of thousands of people to work day and night to produce these. So in the long run, that will shift the balance of if this war continues, and which means that those who are going to appear precisely what the Wall Street Journal was warning against is going to be clear that American imperialism, Israeli imperialism, cannot carry out what it sets out to do. Mm-hmm. And that is a defeat. That's how they lost in Vietnam. That's how they lost in Iraq and Afghanistan. And that's how they lost in Gaza, even though they left a trail of destruction behind them. But that was a humiliating event for Israel. And everyone in Israel knows that. Mm-hmm. The common public talking point today in Israel is Gaza was a scandal that didn't achieve anything, the whole Gaza thing. And this one is going to be an even bigger one. And it's going to add to the crisis of Israeli imperialism. It's going to add to the crisis of US imperialism.
That's the logical analysis of the thing. But do you think that the leaders of Israel and the Trump administration will draw that conclusion immediately? I don't think they will. And the logic, I don't have a crystal ball. I can't bet on this, but it seems to be moving more and more towards some kind of US involvement.
Yes.
And Netanyahu on that, you got to give him credit. He's maneuvered. He's a direct representative of this brutal ruling class.
Yes.
But he's not completely stupid. Some people think, he's just mad. He's defending his material interests personally and that of the ruling class. And he thinks he can get what he wants, which is maneuver in such a way as to force the US to get involved. He's already halfway there because the logic of the last few days has been Trump. Look at the way he shifted.
Yeah.
The last shift has been he's moving forces in. He says the plans are ready. He just hasn't given the go-ahead. Now, the way he thinks, I've seen also that the way he thinks is up the threat to the maximum level in the hope that you can force the regime to Iran to back off and negotiate. He's playing a game of brinkmanship. But you get close enough to the edge of the cliff, eventually you're going to fall over the edge. And this could be the trigger to a major crisis in the Middle East, which will have global impact. It'll have an impact around the world.
Yeah.
And it can, you see, although he says he's an isolationist, but America, I think it has dynamite built into its foundations.
Yeah.
And the dynamite comes from the Middle East and other parts of the world.
Yeah.
It's built into the system. So the attempt to pull back in and stabilize the home front, which is what Trump is. He wants to be the guy that solves all the problems. The tariffs bring the jobs back, stop sending troops abroad, stop getting involved in wars. All of that is unraveling in front of him. He's going to be facing a major crisis at home as a consequence of what he does in the Middle East.
Yeah, and we can already see the contours of this because you have a violent row basically between the two camps of bourgeois in Trump's circle, which is the isolationists, Tucker Carlson, Tulsi Gabbard, who are dead set against this, been out publicly criticizing it. Tucker Carlson said, America is complicit in this. He didn't even say we shouldn't go along. He said we are already complicit in this, and this is a travesty, and this is not good for us. And on the other hand, you have the neocons, the old guard, the traditional political establishment of the Republicans and also the Democrats. Many of them are hiding now under peace flags, but in reality, they're on board with this. And Trump is painting himself into a corner because now he's made such a noise that if he withdraws, he's going to be humiliated. He's going to seem weak. And if he goes ahead, he could tie himself into a quagmire, which could potentially make Iraq and Afghanistan look like child's play.
I mean, just think, if he goes all the way in this attack on Iran, and Iran hits back and hits directly or indirectly. For instance, in Iraq, there are pro-Iranian militias that could attack U.S. bases. If you have a sizable number of U.S. soldiers being killed as a consequence of Trump's policies, which is precisely the opposite of what people in America want.
Yeah.
Imagine the impact that's going to have on those millions of people that voted for Trump only less than a year ago, back in November.
Yeah.
It's gonna shake up American society massively.
Yeah.
It's gonna break down this front which Trump was able to build. Basically, there's a very strange coalition of electoral support around Trump, which goes from the openly white supremacist, racist, middle class types to ordinary working class people who really believe this guy's going to stop American involvement in wars. He's going to bring the jobs back. He's going to bring down inflation. He's going to bring back the good life. Make America great again to working class people doesn't mean the same thing as it does to the ruling elite. It means an America where there are stable jobs, good wages, life gets good again. They're going to get the opposite. They are getting the opposite. When that happens, that front is going to break apart along class lines. And where are those workers going to go that had the illusions that Trump was the guy that was going to solve their problems? That's the question.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, already now you see people are incensed. I read out the poll. Vast majority of Americans are dead set against any American involvement.
That's right.
In this. Only a tiny minority are in favor. There's part of those who are, from a bourgeois point of view, says we shouldn't do this. They're capitalists. But the majority of the working class is also against this. As you say, Trump hasn't delivered what he promised. Trump came to power because people hated the Democrats. They had enough. A significant chunk of the working class swung over in opposition and as an act of rebellion voted for Trump. What were the speaking points that appealed to them? It was jobs, no inflation, reindustrialization, make America great again. Mm-hmm. He meant one thing, but what ordinary people heard was the good old days. Yeah. We had jobs, we had factories, we had industries, our infrastructure wasn't falling apart. That's what he promised them. He said he would be the peace candidate. he has not achieved any peace in Ukraine. In fact, because he keeps playing the game of the neocons, he's tied himself down. He could have walked away from Ukraine. He could have said, I don't care about this. But he's trying to unite the forces behind it, people like Lindsay, what's his name? Sorry, I just have amnesia suddenly. Anyway, the Republican hawks who support him, but they have this idea that we cannot be seen as stepping back. We cannot be seen as losing, which means that he's essentially tied himself to the Ukraine conflict. Mm-hmm. Here again, he's doing the same thing, promising I'm not going to get involved. He's doing exactly what Bush did, what Obama did, what Biden did. These people, what do? They follow the same line. No compromise. Anyone who objects, anyone who makes the slightest objection to our rules-based order must be crushed. And he's gonna, if he goes down this path, we can't say this is a very complicated situation. We don't know which way things are gonna go. Mm-hmm. But he's risking tying himself down to an even bigger crisis than any of those.
That's right.
And as you say, what's the result gonna be? The result's gonna be the breakup of this uneasy alliance. We're already seeing the contours of this. He had a fallout with Elon Musk. What was that about?
Public spending.
Spending.
That's right.
The bourgeois, the big capitalists want
a big cut.
Serious cuts.
That's right.
And they're right. From a capitalist point of view, they have a point because they say
the debt is unsustainable.
It's unsustainable. Mm. And Trump,
but
if Trump does that, he will stand with an uprising on his hands.
He has to attack his own electoral base.
Exactly. And he doesn't want to do that. So that's caused, he can't satisfy anyone because he's trying to satisfy everyone. He can't satisfy anyone. He can't satisfy Elon Musk. But also this big, beautiful bill did not really give that many concessions to working class people. He removed a few taxes from some working, but
even the tax cuts benefited the higher levels.
Yeah, but he said like tips, no tax on tips and overtime, and those are minor, insignificant. If they're going to count anything, they aren't going to count much. In reality, this was a huge attack also on Medicare and other, healthcare and so on.
Which is an attack on the very poor,
on the poorest, on food stamps and these kind of things. So no one is really satisfied, but he can't move in any direction either. Now on the question of the war, that comes out again. Mm-hmm. The hawks are saying, we must attack, otherwise we're going to lose face. The isolationists are saying, if we attack, we're going to be dragged into a quagmire. We're going to lose out. We need to isolate. They're both right, actually.
Mm. They're both right and they're both wrong.
And they're both wrong.
Yeah.
The problem is the insoluble contradictions of American capitalism. Oh, we forgot one, immigration. Again, clearly as a distraction maneuver.
Of course.
He made these immigration raids, these ICE raids, which have caused a huge uproar amongst large sections. Incidentally, the Democrats called these No Kings marches over the weekend. They've been trying to call protests for a while, but no one wants to go along because they have lost all credibility.
Yeah.
But they did manage to get 4 or 5 million people out in 2,000 cities. Now, a big chunk of these were liberal, insignificant layers, middle classes. But there were some working class layers. There were some young people. Our comrades, just before the show, actually, our comrades intervened all over the country. I just got the result. It's on their website, the Revolutionary Communists of America. Let me just see here. Yes, over the weekend they got 580 contacts, as in people who are interested in joining our organization, and raised $4,400 and sold 678 issues of our paper. Fantastic. I mean, and you read the reports. Fantastic interventions. But what I'm trying to get at is, all of this is whipping up people. And what did the ICE raids achieve? Not much, really.
No.
And he had to withdraw some of it because some of the industries were complaining that
he's disrupting some of the industries because he's reducing the available workforce.
The cheap workforce
which is, I mean, I think you've said it before on other podcasts. The aim of any anti-immigration policy carried out by the bourgeois is for electoral purposes. I remember reading an article a couple of years back in the Financial Times where this writer actually said to the right-wing politicians of all countries, in effect, anti-immigration policies are good politics, but bad economics. So basically what he's saying is, go through the motions of attacking immigrants, but don't actually expel them, please, because we need them. It's cheap labor that we need to have. And in fact, you see the way Trump has even zigzagged on this, because the hotel industry, the restaurant industry. In just a minute, we need these people. It is an unfortunate, tragic thing. Of course, he's expelling ordinary, poor immigrant people who are just working to scrape by. But the main aim is not actually to expel the bulk of them. The aim is to make them as illegal as possible, in effect.
Yeah.
So they can't join a union. They can't go to a lawyer and demand rights. They can't protest.
Yeah.
They can't complain about long hours or low wages. Super exploitable class. That's what that is about. But if you notice, it's something across a lot of especially the advanced capitalist countries. It's one of the policies that the right wing are using to try and maintain their electoral base, because the message they send out is there's too many immigrants. The reason why healthcare doesn't work is there's too many immigrants. There's not enough housing, too many immigrants, et cetera, et cetera. So not enough jobs, too many immigrants. Well, in actual fact, the same article I was quoting pointed out that in America, without the immigrants, America would already be in a recession. They actually do help where they need a workforce. It's part of the capitalist economy. So it's demagogy.
Of course.
But it's a very simple idea that you tell ordinary working class people, the reason you haven't got a job is because there's too many immigrants, or the reason of this problem or that problem. When in actual fact, it's the people at the top. The money they've spent on the Ukraine war, for example, if they hadn't spent it on that, then they'd spent it on welfare in America, you wouldn't have these problems. Yeah. But who's saying that? The Democrats are not going to say that. They were warmongers. They were
the ones who started it.
None of the people at the top are ever going to speak the truth on this question, because it would expose the whole system. That task falls to people like us to give the facts and figures and give the real explanation.
Yeah. And it's clear that it's demagogy. What is also quite interesting is that it's not really working.
No.
Because it's very temporary.
It's actually, although there is a significant layer that does support Trump on this question, you look at the figures I've looked at, it's actually split America down the middle.
Yeah.
It's not like a tiny little minority defends the immigrants and there's a bulk. It's quite a split down the middle. It's massively destabilizing American society, because a significant layer of the youth and the working class is coming out in support of the immigrant community, and it's simply increasing the instability of the United States without solving any of the problems.
And as we can see right now, in terms of the Iran war, it's not really stemmed the tide of dissatisfaction.
No,
because as soon as something happens, people are snapped back to, hey, what's going on here? You're starting another war. And it's infuriating people. Alan Woods, who wrote a very, very good article on the website, is going to be linked in the description to this podcast. He quotes, this is a podcast, there are hundreds of quotes like this. This is a Trumpist podcast. He says, "Fuck it, I voted for no wars, cheap gas, no taxes, cheap groceries, Maha. Make America healthy again." What of these things actually happened? If Trump takes us to war, I'm done with him and his administration. That is the mood. So even in spite of all this hoo-ha about immigration raids and ICE raids, they didn't actually succeed. And now he's in the midst. He's painted himself into a corner. This process, this is what we're seeing, is the uncontrolled unraveling of the Trump administration. Mm-hmm. This is not because Trump is a maniac or not. It has nothing to do with it. This is because he's presiding over a system which is in a deep, deep crisis.
That's right.
And there's nothing he can do about that. I'm sure if America didn't have the debt that it has.
Nobody can remove the fundamental contradictions of the capitalist system.
Exactly.
The debt in America, which is astronomical, is a consequence of decades of economic policy.
Yeah.
Basically, what the capitalist class have done for decades is they've kicked the can down the road in the sense of they've spent money to stabilize the situation. During the pandemic, they paid millions of people to sit at home to do nothing. Now, you got to find that money from somewhere. It just led to a ballooning of debt. Since the 80s and 90s, massive credit, massive pumping out of credit to create a market for the goods that the capitalists want to sell. The problem under capitalism, there is a fundamental contradiction in the appropriation of the wealth by the capitalist class and the working class receiving wages, which the global sum total of the wages is not enough to buy all the goods the capitalists want to sell. So either they find markets abroad, and that explains also the conflicts going on globally, or they create the market artificially through credit, which for a period can work. But eventually, the fundamental contradiction feeds its way into the system. You get to the point where the debt becomes unsustainable. Somebody like Musk, he's telling the truth to Trump when he says, hey, what are you doing? You should be cutting. Of course, for Musk, that's the logical thing to do as a bourgeois. The politicians of the bourgeois system have a problem that if you apply what is the logical program from the point of view of the interests of the capitalist class, well, you tend to lose votes. Every politician that has come into power and carried out that program ends up becoming extremely unpopular, even if they win with what seems to be a landslide victory. And the problem Trump is facing is how do you manage these contradictions? He cannot solve them. That is the problem. And eventually, what comes to the surface is the real contradiction in the situation, and that creates a divide between the classes. Now, what they're worried about is the working class actually starting to realize where the problem really lies. That's the problem. They've been trying to stop that, pulling back. I can do it with tariffs. I can do it with this. I can do it with anti-immigration policy. But the contradiction eventually comes to the surface. When that happens, you can get a very sharp change in the consciousness of millions of people. And that is what they're staring at today. The purpose of an analysis like this, I mean, you can say, oh, you're just discussing the ins and outs of international geopolitics or whatever, that Trump and Netanyahu and spheres of influence and all the rest of it. But at the end of the day, all of these actions are going to have a huge impact on the lives of millions of working class people. If this situation, and that is a concrete possibility, leads to a massive downturn in the economy, it's going to have an impact on the lives of millions of working class people and on their thinking. That's the point. Now, the fact that our comrades are meeting such success in terms of selling papers and getting people who are interested shows you that there's a much wider constituency out there of people looking for a class analysis. What are the interests of the working class and what policies we need to carry out? And it's inevitable. This raises the question of, unless you remove this system, there's no solution. You can move this way, you can zigzag one way, go right, go left. Trump, with all his maneuvers, all his seemingly clever, doesn't change the fundamental contradictions of the system, and they will inevitably come to the surface. The truth eventually emerges.
And I think, I mean, we're bringing together all the threads of this episode, because we're still talking about the Iran war, by the way.
Yes.
Because all of this is interconnected.
Yes.
Capitalism is a world system. Today's capitalism is a world system dominated by US imperialism. And therefore, the crisis of the system as a whole is a crisis of the US. And the crisis of the US is the crisis of the world as a whole.
That's right.
That's what we're seeing. That look at what's happening in Iran. It's quite likely that America and Israel are going to come out of this war with a defeat, which is going to have severe consequences and so on. But what are they going to leave behind? Like they were defeated in Gaza, but what did they leave behind? barbarism. They have left Syria in a state of barbarism. Lebanon is being dismantled gradually, worn out. Iraq, they've destroyed. Afghanistan, they've destroyed. Iran is a very old civilization, a proud culture, is being destroyed. What they're doing now, hitting energy facilities and other infrastructure, and the sanctions that they've imposed on Iran, is destroying the social fabric of Iran itself. We haven't talked about this here, but Israel is supporting all sorts of reactionary national movements in Iran, trying to unravel Iran. That is their aim, to render it, unable to act against the dictates of Israeli and American imperialism. U.S. imperialism is the single most reactionary force this world has ever known. Mm-hmm. It has destroyed billions of lives throughout its history, and we can see that it's not getting less lethal. It's not getting less dangerous. It's getting more dangerous. It's the main enemy of the world working class, and it's also the enemy of the American working class. But this is what a lot of people have asked themselves or asked me, what can we do? What can we do now? Can we send money? Can we give support? People want to do something because people realize this is unjust what's happening. This is not right in every way you look at it. And I think the point is precisely this, that it's not about doing something in Iran. It's about doing something here. In the West is the fountainhead of reaction. It's a fountainhead of rot and barbarism that is just, spilling all over the world, basically. It's overflown and just spilling throughout and destroying one country after another. The most important task, if you want to do something out there, if you want to do, you have to start with a systematic struggle against this regime, because it's dangerous. And it's the same people who are killing people in Iran, in Iraq, in Afghanistan, in Libya, and all across Africa, across the entire, that are actually killing working class people here as well, by cutting into pensions, by cutting into fuel subsidies, by cutting into healthcare. They're the ones who are attacking the working class in the West. It's one enemy. And if you want to stop these wars, it's a question of attacking the enemy at home. And the main enemy is in the West. And just one last thing before I give it to you. I know I'm going on a bit of a tangent here. I'm very serious about this. Russia and China. Now this question of a multipolar world. A lot of people are saying the multipolar world is a more just world. We have more world powers. We have a more just world. It's clear that Russia and China are rising world powers. They're nowhere near the level of American imperialism, but they're definitely gaining in on it. And yes, I think America losing in Ukraine or anywhere at the hands of Russia and China, or with the help of that, is cheered by working class people everywhere. A defeat to U.S. imperialism is a good thing, but these guys are not going to introduce a just world, a stable world. Look at what's happening today. Look at Russia. If Russia, the Putin, for example, he talks about being against NATO, against U.S. imperialism. They all talk about that. Oh, the arrogance. What have they done? They've acted. They've sent out messages. They've been complaining vehemently. They might have to, in the end, for their own reasons, might have to come down more concretely on the side of Iran and support it in one way or the other. But they also have interest in maintaining relations with Israel.
That's right.
And they're cynically, they're not defending what's right. They also don't want a nuclear Iran, because nuclear Iran is also their neighbor, which means that they can dictate less in the region, in the Caucasus, where they both have influence. They're not the friends of the Iranian people or any other people. The only people who can actually fight against imperialism is the working class, is the world working class.
That's right. Well, look, many peoples around the world are paying a very heavy price for the domination of imperialism.
Yeah.
The Congo, the war there over these years, something like 6 million people killed in these wars. Who's involved? Militias, that are backed by this or that imperialist power to grab the minerals in the area. Sudan has seen a civil war, and the different powers are also vying for influence in these countries. Wherever imperialism intervenes, I mean, we're saying about regime change. They're bombing Iran. Well, they said they were going to sort things out in Libya.
Yeah.
They bombed Libya. Yeah, they overthrew Gaddafi. What was the result? Syria. They bombed Syria. What was the result? Civil wars and barbarism and the destruction of the social fabric of these countries. Wherever imperialism intervenes, it creates this. And the question is this. From a global point of view, where is the force that can put an end to this system? It is the working class. And it's the working class in, logically, where industry and the economy is the most developed. That means in North America, it means in Western Europe, it means in China, where you have a powerful, huge industrial working class. It's also growing in countries like India and a few other places. The working class is the class that has an interest in putting an end to this system. Now, if you want to help the people of Iran, the people of Gaza, the people in the Congo, the people in the Sudan, the terrible butchery in the Ukraine, well, put an end to the power of the imperialist ruling elites in countries like the United States and their little friends in Europe, the Germans, the French, the British, the Italians, who all collaborate in oppressing these peoples. You see the way all the Western governments line up to back Netanyahu when it comes. They'll make a few criticisms. It's like, it's typical. They want to maintain the system with all its negative consequences, but they'd like to soften the edges a little bit and avoid some of the worst excesses because they realize that the millions of people are starting to get angry and they're trying to hold this wave back. But these are the people who are responsible for the mess the world is facing. If you didn't have the interests of US imperialism, Israeli imperialism, Iran would be in a different position. The people of Iran would be freer, actually, to deal with the regime. This question of regime change, toppling the regime in Iran, is not a task that falls to Netanyahu or Trump. It belongs to the Iranian workers. They have the task of overthrowing that regime. And there's been many movements in the past that show that the people of Iran are sick of this regime. But it's their task. Anybody that tries to intervene from outside will achieve the opposite effect.
Which is what's happening now.
Exactly. What we can do here in the advanced capitalist countries is struggle against our ruling classes. Imagine if American capitalism was removed.
Yeah.
And the American working class had direct control over what they're going to do with their resources. The American workers have no interest in arming a massive, army that goes policing the world. They have no interest in going to bomb Iran or what's being done in the Ukraine. Those resources, they have an interest in using it for healthcare, for pensions, for decent housing. That's what the working class interest is. But to achieve that, you got to get the control of the economic resources, which are enormous. In the hands of the working class, you could create a good life for American workers at the same time as removing the threat of US imperialism around the globe and alleviate the conditions for the masses of these countries. The root cause of the problem is capitalism and the massive, the huge imperialist powers that dominate. And the main one is American imperialism with their smaller friends that collaborate with them. The task is build a political force that explains all this and build a party and a movement which can put an end to this system. That's our task. Now, it can seem like, oh, but what are you doing for the suffering of the people? Well, the thing is this. So long as Israel exists as a regime, the Palestinians will continue to face what they faced. They faced attack after attack after attack. And what's happened now is the barbarism that comes from this. You remove that regime and the ruling capitalist elite that governs it, you begin to solve the problem. You do the same in America, you do it in Germany, you do it in Britain. That's our task today.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. But also, I think this is anyone out there thinking we need to do something. You need to get organized, and you should get organized in the Revolutionary Communists International, because that is precisely our task, to organize that struggle all over the world, in countries all over the world, and mainly in the West, which is where the snake's head is, to use an Israeli phrase used for Iran. Now, one last thing, because this is, unfortunately, our last episode of this season. We will be taking a break after this until the first week of September, the first Thursday in September, where we'll be back with a new setup. We're upgrading our setup here, and also in order so that we can focus on the Revolutionary Communist International Congress, World Congress, which is taking place at the end of July. But I think it would be good to just take a brief moment to take stock of what we've done so far, because we've gotten a question, and I've heard this question a few times. Why would a communist and a Marxist spend week after week analyzing the mundane, ephemeral events of everyday world politics, right? Isn't our task, why are we just, analyzing what did Trump say here? What did Elon Musk do here? What did Macron say or Putin say, and so on? Why is that important? Shouldn't we bring out big theoretical formulas and programs? And isn't that more the task of it? Isn't this beneath us in a way? I've heard this question asked in many different ways. Shouldn't we discuss the general processes? Why are we discussing these small events and not the general processes? And I think that would be a good question to end the season with, because I think it really goes to the heart of a lot of questions. I want to hear your answer first.
Well, first of all, I'd like to say the feedback I've had from comrades, not just comrades, also sympathizers in many countries, is that they greatly appreciate the podcast. A lot of comrades listen to it. They look forward to it. I'm sure it's a bit disappointing that it's going to have to wait until September. But we'll carry on writing articles, I'm sure, and we're not going to stop our activities. But they greatly appreciate it. And I've heard comments from comrades saying it's actually contributed to raising the general political level, the level of understanding of the comrades themselves. Now, you see, what's the purpose of a podcast like this? I mean, it's to apply the method of Marxism. It's a weekly podcast. You can't generalize simply every week. You've also got to go into the concrete events that are taking place. You've got to give answers to why certain things are happening in Iran, why Netanyahu is behaving the way he is, why Trump does what he does, why the European capitalists do what they do. Because when you are trying to build a genuine revolutionary communist force, a communist party, our comrades have got to have the ideas, the analysis, not just in general, but also be able to answer questions about what's going on around us. And there's not a disconnect between the general and the particular. The particular can be explained through the general, but the general also has to be applied to the particular. Otherwise, it becomes abstract and disconnected from what's actually happening around us in the world. And I think the strength of Marxism is that it can be applied in this way. I mean, if you look at the writings of Marx, he didn't just generalize. I mean, obviously you generalize in your theory, but he also analyzed specific events. Look at Engels. I remember reading one text by Engels. He was analyzing the military tactics of Garibaldi when he took Palermo in Sicily, right? He respected Garibaldi as a great military tactician, but he analyzed the details of the tactics. Was he wasting his time by doing that? I think he was educating the ranks of the movement, even in such matters, showing that Marxists have a lot to say, not just generalizations, but also about particular situation, understanding what is behind the Ukraine war, what is behind the behavior of Putin, what is behind the behavior of Trump or Netanyahu. Now, obviously, we're not psychologists, although even psychology has a role. Trotsky actually used that in some of his analysis. But it's to actually bring out from the daily events, the weekly events, the monthly events, the ongoing events in a situation, how things are evolving and why, where they're going to lead also is important, to give a perspective in a dialectical manner, i.e. to take what's happening today, not simply on the surface level, but look beneath what the processes are below the surface, try and understand where all these contradictions are leading. What's the direction of events? What's the most likely direction of events? In order to more sharply understand what our task is today in this situation and what we need to build. And have the ideas, obviously, when you're selling the paper, when you're intervening in rallies and demonstrations, talking to workers, you need to have the answers. You need to be able to connect with what is in the minds of ordinary people in a given moment. And that's why discussions like this are very useful. And that explains also, I think, why so many comrades actually look forward to it and say they benefit from it, they gain a lot from it, and they appreciate it.
Yeah. In Faust, Goethe's Faust, he says, all theory is gray, my friend, but forever green is the tree of life.
Yes.
That's actually Mephistopheles saying that to Faust. But you see, there is a philosophical question here of the abstract and the concrete. There is this idea in academia and in anyone there's always a tendency with people who are engaged in theory to overemphasize that, to take theory as above the abstract above the concrete, the laws above reality. And this can be, you can say in words, no, that's not the fact, but in practice you can do that. But the point is, from a Marxist point of view, Marxism is not just a set of abstract laws, but it's a question of is laws that are deduced from reality.
Look, if you read Marx's Capital, it's full of minute detail about the economy.
Exactly.
And he spent a lot of time accumulating facts.
Yes.
Mountains of facts from the texts, from the blue books that he looked at. It was from all of that that then the generalization emerges.
Exactly. And the general is not something that stands above society. The general is the inner dynamic of society as it is, the interplay between the forces at play.
There's two sides to the formula. There is the detail and there's the generalization.
Exactly.
They're not separate. One is not an alternative to the other. One produces the other. And the analysis of the detail allows for the generalization. The generalization then allows to understand the detail more precisely. Because you put it in the greater context. Yeah. It's a two-way process.
Exactly. There is this idea often that communists are just, this is a caricature, and you tell most communists they would deny it. But I've seen it, we've seen it many times. Communists just organize and then they fight for wages and they read theoretical works, and that's it. It's organization, economic demands, and reading theory. But how do you, the class struggle is not a uniform thing that just replicates itself. We read about the history of the Russian Revolution. That event will never be replicated. The next great revolutions will be very, very different. But the point is precisely to learn to understand the underlying processes, the general processes, which are similar, how they are derived from those particular things. And that's what we're doing. This podcast is analyzing the general processes in world capitalism on a week-to-week basis. These are not processes that are finished yet. Mm-hmm. We don't know where things are going. Who would have thought 2 weeks ago that we would be sitting here today discussing a war on Iran? Who knows whether tomorrow the West will be at war with Iran or not? Nobody knows. Donald Trump doesn't know. He cannot predict that. And either way, either choice will lead to drastically different situations. But obviously, underneath all of this, the crisis will continue. Yeah. Our task is precisely to look at these concrete events and identify the general processes. The working class does not just need a program to go out with generalities. The working class at all levels need to be trained in understanding and wants to. You talk with workers, they want to know.
Yes.
Why is this happening? What can we do? Why? Because then you realize, what can we do about it? How can we participate in this struggle? How can we move forward? It's a guide for action, in other words. But that guide to action is not just developed by studying theory, which is extremely important, but it's also by applying that theory into the concrete situation.
Right.
And that's what we're doing.
Taking into account the facts on the ground and also the new facts in a situation, which can determine a nuanced position rather than just simply, read history, it's going to repeat itself, and then you're ready because you know what's going to happen. Things have changed.
Yeah.
The economy has changed. The working class has changed in the sense that it's more powerful than it ever has been.
Yeah.
That's just one little fact, but it's a key fact in understanding how things can pan out in the next period. And all we can do at the end of the day is develop what is a feasible working hypothesis based on the facts available, the understanding of history, a general analysis of the situation. And then you look at the facts as they evolve.
Yeah.
And what is happening now between Israel and Iran and Trump's dilemma, maybe at this moment people are saying, which way is he going to go? Well, we will soon know.
Yes.
And once you do know, you'll be able to analyze why he actually went in that direction and not another. It's an ongoing process.
Yes. Having said that, we are going to have a break now for a little bit more than 2 months, which will allow our audience to dive into revolutionary theory, hopefully Marxist theory. You can go in and listen to our theoretical podcast, sister podcast, The Spectre of Communism. You can, if you're not already a member of the Revolutionary Communist International, you can contact us via our website, marxist.com. Get involved. Obviously, Marxist.com will be publishing for the majority of this, for the duration of this period. And we will be back again in September, same day as usual, every Thursday, 6 p.m. UK time. Yes, I think that's it. We'll see you then. My name is Hamid Alzadeh. This was Fred Weston. This was Against the Stream.